without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Dan Carmody.
Thank you, Frank. That urban-rural divide has kind of gone throughout my whole life. I grew up in a place called Oak Park, Illinois. Ernest Hemingway, Frank Lloyd Wright, Ray Kroc, McDonald's. My favorite and most immediate neighbor to me was Sam Giancana. Anybody? Notorious mobster. We used to trick or treat at his home, although he was never there. He lived on the lam in Mexico City my whole youth. I had a very normal bungalow in our neighborhood. You could only distinguish by two things: the putting green-like lawn all the way around the house, and the doormat, which was that traditional, if you remember, they came in red or green. They were kind of rubber nibbed. They usually said welcome. His was custom made. It simply said unwelcome. When I was 8, my dad bought a farm out in western Iowa. Actually, I was 13, 1963. He got introduced to western Iowa by a bunch of entrepreneurs. They had failed at packing pork in a place called Perry, Iowa. They moved up the Boyer River a little bit to a place called Denison, Iowa, birthplace of Donna Reed. And they started a company that would become known as Iowa Beef Packers, which today is the beef division of Tyson Foods, which controls something like 40% of our beef supply from production all the way through to end. And I spend a little bit more time on this than I have usually, because last week I was in a meeting with technology entrepreneurial developer types, nationwide gathering in Detroit. And they kept referencing what a game changer technology innovation is. And I hearkened back to 1963, and the innovation in food systems can be as profound as any innovation in any cluster, any economic cluster. Iowa Beef failed packing pork, but the concept of putting beef into a box and shipping it in a densely populated truck or rail car, rather than shipping live animals to cities and slaughtering there in halves and sending them to A&P and the like, where union butchers would cut them into steaks. That simple innovation, in a space of 5 years, nearly bankrupt their legacy competitors and put 45,000 amalgamated meat cutter workers out of work. That's innovation. And food systems, or technology systems, or manufacturing systems, our economies are dependent on innovation in all of them. And we should be proud of our Michigan root industries of manufacturing and food, number 1 and 2 in our state. And we shouldn't think of them as not new industries. Not new, that sort of everything's going to come in a silicone wafer someday is not exactly going to happen. So let's take pride in our agricultural roots. The bigness, the smallness of places, they've been devastated by the storm of economic change over the last 50 years. Whether it's rural Iowa, rural Michigan, or central Detroit, the economic forces are the same coin, different sides. Now in college, I wasn't an entrepreneur. I decided to become a city planner by growing up in Chicago. But next door to where I worked, there was this plant that gathered up all the soil from central Illinois and central Indiana, and they homogenated it and pasteurized whatever, hydrogenated it, and shipped it in 2 16-inch stainless steel tubes next door to the place where my friends and I made squeeze parquet and Miracle Whip at the Kraft Foods plant. It was a great college job. I was actually able to pay my own way through the University of Illinois because of Kraft Foods, so I have nothing bad to say about them. But what I really came to realize is that all of these products, and many more, were 95% all the same stuff, this 18-inch pipe of vegetable oil. And so, what food scientists can invent is just beyond belief. So, combining 2 food groups that heretofore didn't exist until 1967 or so. Then I would, later my food career outside of urban planning took on a twist where I opened 6 bars in 10 years in cities up and down the Mississippi River. And that's where I really learned about the other side of entrepreneurship, risk, opening your own business. Now, my dad was a serial risk taker. I've been a serial risk taker in small business and in nonprofit organizations my entire life. We were 5 for 6, maybe 3.5 for 6. Clinton, Iowa was kind of on the bubble. But it was great to learn the people skills associated with entrepreneurship development. And running a tavern is the closest thing I know to running a large public market, because you have to deal with so many different types of people. Now, we are what I would call, and I have become, I was an entrepreneur, but now I'm part of the entrepreneurial industrial complex. That's us. This support system for entrepreneurs. And how many would you consider yourself in that space? And how many would you consider yourselves entrepreneurs? So that's about maybe 15%. You don't have to be an entrepreneur to help entrepreneurs, but I think it helps. But I also think that this nature of risk is something that we need to spend some time on, because inherent in risk is failure. And I'm here today, and I'm successful today not because of the 4.5 successes, but the 1.5 failures. And I would argue that I was 6 for 6 in opening businesses without, cover your ears now, cover your ears, entrepreneurial industrial complex, without ever having written a business plan. Now, I might not be here today if I had learned how to write a business plan. So there's good news and bad news there. But 5 out of 6 gets you in the Hall of Fame. And there's 3 businesses still left that are iconic businesses and they're in town that I'm very proud of. Having said that, I'm a big subscriber, and I think he's been around Michigan, to some of the rural development confabs of the, I always forget his name, the Italian guy.
Yes.
Ernesto?
Yeah, I can't even pronounce it. The notion that you have to be good at 3 things to succeed in business is really critical. You got to have a love for a product, you got to know the product, you got to know how to market the product, and you got to account for the product. And no one person, as an entrepreneur, if they're good at all 3 things, wants to do all 3 things. So you have to build a team around those 3 basic skill sets. I believe that's critical, that's basic understanding. Now, we're the kind of guys, we'd get $50,000 in the bank, we'd go build our next bar. And so when the last of 6 didn't work out so well, we had to reshuffle. I also owned 3 bar, restaurant, nightclubs, and I had 4 at one time with 3 children underneath the age of 5. So I learned about a different form of sustainability that wasn't economic necessarily. It's balancing life interests with your entrepreneurial career. So I looked around my skill sets as a planner, as a businessman, spent the rest of my life to date helping nonprofit organizations turn place around. So Rock Island, Illinois, which was devastated by the Rust Belt recession in the 1980s, downtown sunk to incredibly poor levels. It had as much time attracting customers as teeny tiny towns, and that's true of many mid-sized cities. The ability to compete, whether you're a mid-sized, there's half a dozen urban areas in this country that never went through a period where it was almost impossible to compete. But let's remember, as we struggle to rebuild our places, that the struggle didn't happen when times were bad. Most of this destruction happened in the 30 years when times were good. The building cities that were easy because the factories were humming, we didn't think much about our cities. What's happened since the depressions of the 80s and 90s into the 2008 meltdown is we've come together as communities and we have to figure out how to support our entrepreneurs, because we realize that big enterprise isn't necessarily coming back to many of our smaller places or the hearts of our cities. And this is spade work. You got to do it one project at a time. This block alone, 12 different projects over 5 years. Now, when it comes to taking risk, it doesn't stop when you enter the nonprofit sector. I don't recommend doing this. These are 2 signature buildings in downtown Rock Island's Main Street. This building was the last Walgreens store in the city center, and this is what it looks like today. It's 8 different retail suites on the ground floor and 24 units of housing upstairs. I'm pretty proud of this project. It ended up being about, it was only 2 projects. Project one was to stabilize the building and do the retail build out of the first floor at a projected cost of $800,000. I was the project manager. I hired the architect. I hired the contractors. We did the work. At the end of the season, I totaled the tally up 4 different times, and the total came to $1.2 million. Now, there was a $400, it's a 50% overrun on the projected budget cost. I was the only person in the world that knew that. I was also going through a divorce at the time, and I thought going to my first board meeting after I discovered this little overrun, because we were too lean of an organization to be actually taking on that big of a project, I didn't know if I'd have a job. So here's what happened. Presented the facts at a board meeting. Because we had enough goodwill as an organization in the bank and enough believability in our entrepreneurial spark that we were providing for that community, non-entrepreneurial, bureaucratic bankers and insurance people, understanding the need for entrepreneurism in that town and the spark, within 2 weeks raised $400,000 as a line of credit, to insure a line of credit, which we borrowed against to finish the project. It led eventually to another property owner donating an equally sized older abandoned building that was in better shape so that we could take both upstairs and turn it into one housing project, because the upstairs of this building, which featured during its 2 renovations 4 different building collapses, was so far gone that the numbers just didn't work for this building by itself. Now, I have still 2 bankers who talked vigorously at me and opposed this bailout, even though they didn't have a choice because we'd already spent the money, which I don't recommend that approach. It's better to do it on the front end. But they still thought that it would probably have been better if this building had been turned into a parking lot. Today, the success of the housing project, we put that building into a partnership with a for-profit partner. The building donated to us, we put into the partnership with a for-profit housing developer because we didn't have those skill sets. He didn't want, the Chicago-based housing developer saw the opportunity for housing but didn't have anything to do with trying to find or incubate retail tenants on the first floors of these buildings. We took back a 30-year lease for $1 a year. That went into service in 2001, so that's through 2031. In 2011, all the notes that we borrowed on the building were paid off. The spaces remain filled, and it creates about an $80,000 a year cash flow to the nonprofits to use as they see fit to incubate and do other projects. The very definition of patient capital, which I heard a great story about Harrison and their building of a food hub. All of our communities need to find those places where we can build projects, not necessarily with all grant money, but we do need patient capital. So after 20 years in the trenches, I would say there are 5 key principles that guide my work. You got to be effective in the nonprofit world. We got a lot of people spinning wheels, not getting much done. We have to model effective behavior. We have to be inclusive. We have to be entrepreneurial. We have to be incremental. Look for those big hits, but we set up the table, we score the runs with singles and doubles. And lastly, it's got to be about our towns. You can learn from other cities, but you really have to spend most of your time looking inward to find out what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are the opportunities, and repackaging them and moving forward. Now, while this sort of bottoms-up kind of citizen-led initiative is going on in my head, at the national level, all hell is breaking loose, courtesy of, first, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, which sent our oil prices to the stratosphere. The reaction at the U.S. Department of Agriculture was Earl Butz, down the road from Champaign, Illinois, Secretary of Agriculture from Purdue University, who muttered famous quotes all his career life, the patron saint of big ag, by the way. He said, of course, in response to the surge in oil prices, we're going to grow grain to meet Soviet demand, which collapsed because of Soviet crop failure. And we did. We got big or we went home. We grew fence row to fence row, and big American ag went on steroids and became gigungous American food systems. And then the Soviet crops recovered, and then we invented high fructose corn syrup down the road in Decatur, Illinois, to take advantage of find a product to get rid of all this glut of corn. And it began the process of the great oligarchization, that's a term I just made up. But our food systems became centralized in very few hands. The part between farmers and consumers are these companies that control that market share. It's frightening. When you think in Michigan, one fluid milk producer controls 80% of the statewide market, only 70% nationwide. If you're a farmer, if you're a producer, and you got one customer, that's not a good situation to be in. So scaling of big food systems also did two things. They took people out of the equation and mechanized it, and so our rural areas got depopulated even faster than they already were, and it concentrated wealth in a very few hands. And it led to so all that corn oil in those 18-inch pipes, all that sweetener that was supposed to be sold to the Soviets, that all ended up in our convenience stores in the form of highly processed food products. That's sweeteners and salad oils. And so now we push food costs with government support down underneath 10% of average household expenditures, 2010 achievement. Imagine where the economy would be if we spent as much as, say, the French did at 16, 17% of household income on good food. Well, we'd have fewer RVs and boats to buy, but we might not have 19% of our gross national product being allocated for health care. And so the unintended consequence of creating commodity-based agricultural products is this healthcare problem that's going to bankrupt us if we don't figure out how to do it. So the food work we're doing and the re-regionalization is already going on. The Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food, the narrative that USDA is trying to whisper in one set of consumers' ears because it doesn't want to offend big ag out of the other set of their ears is really, really important work that they're doing. Changing the narrative around food, moving food collectively in our lifetimes. I look around the room, I see a lot of people in the 40 to 60 age group. Food was basically in the back of our brains most of our life, and now it's slowly starting to kind of come to front of brain for many people in this country. Not too late. Number of farmers markets skyrocketed. So today, we have industrial ag, big ag, factory farming that has 97% market share. And we have regional food systems, organic, sustainable food systems with 97% self-righteousness and 3% market share. So at Eastern Market, we're a place where those two worlds collide. And we think it's important that we modify our current food systems without killing it in the meantime so we can continue to eat something. So at the market, we work on processing, distribution, and retailing, which we've done since 1891, and work with others on completing that system. The parts don't change whether it's local or global in scale. You got to do the same steps. Now, I would hearken that food system work is a lot like downtown development work was when I started in it in the 1970s and 80s. It's new. It's like watershed management was in the 70s and 80s. There's no book on re-regionalizing our food systems. We're at the process of doing that right now. So it's an exciting time to be in this space because hopefully in 30 years we'll create a book like we have around downtowns, around watershed management, as we learn what works and what doesn't work. So, market's rich history, 1891, regional food hub, public market. Terms are somewhat interchangeable for us. Two primary products, food and conviviality. We'll talk mostly today about food, but that social convening function and our coming together around food, that metaphor couldn't be more important in trying to pull this country back together again from being ripped from right to left by larger forces. So that Eastern Market is beloved in Detroit regional people's minds, not because of the food, but because it's a place where people from all walks of life come. They have a great time, largely because they're surrounded by people that aren't like them. And we don't have enough places like that in our metropolitan areas. It leads to all sorts of unusual gatherings. Now, the market itself is a hotbed of entrepreneurialism. When you think of us, we're kind of an outlier. Most other large public markets have a dedicated market hall with permanent tenants, whether it's the West Side Market in Cleveland, my favorite market that is an Eastern Market, or Grand Rapids' newest entry in its downtown market. 10 or 12, 15, 30 permanent vendors. We don't have that. We have 5 buildings. We fill them with transient vendors, different times of the day, different times of the week, different times of the season. Our roots was as a wholesale market. From 1891 to 1925, we were a monopolist of regional food distribution. 1925, rail service came to Detroit and the terminal on the southwest side of the city. So produce from California and Florida joined the regional competition. And then both of us have lost market share since the 50s, as first our old line grocers, Kroger's and Jewel's and Farmer Jack's, and now more recently Target and Walmart were the fastest growing segment. And by the way, food retailing is the last major food group to really consolidate. We're now at 45% of market share by Kroger, Target, Walmart. So what happens when retailers are up to 60 or 70% is frightening. The weekday market that we're known for, the Saturday market year-round, as many as 50,000 people, started out as a place where the wholesalers would dump their product at the end of the week. Now it's sort of the tail that wags the dog. In the last 5 years, we've added a seasonal Tuesday market. We've also added a Sunday market to create what we do at the market, which is so much in our DNA, we really haven't started to talk about it but for the last 2 years. And that's that we are the place of entry into the market for entrepreneurs. So for a $45 to $125 daily stall rental fee, on average, depending on whether you rent for the year or by the day, $45 per day, you can access 30 to 50,000 people during the warm months of the Eastern market. That's a huge opportunity to get your product out there, to get the name out there, to earn some incremental sales, to grow your business. And the stories around the market that inspire so much affection for the market are the number of family fortunes that began by some new immigrant coming to Eastern market and selling their product. Not necessarily that would lead to that particular product, but they would begin those business skills needed to succeed. And it would lead in different directions once people got into the world of being an entrepreneur. So big and small, we represent them all. Urban agriculture is really hot. I hate that term because it is used usually as a placeholder for regional food system development, and that's inappropriate. Urban ag is just one piece of that process. But there are 1,400 community gardeners that are starting to produce food, the 70 largest of which show up at the market in a Growing in Detroit stand. 3 of them have already gone off on their own. The economic benefits of if we could get that 3% market share of sustainable ag, regional ag to 20%, in Detroit's population, not counting metro area, just the city, creates about $19 million of new state and local business taxes, about 5,000 jobs, about $125 million of new household income. So, quickly, one of the things we're working very much on is creating a multifaceted, 9-part support strategy, not for growers, but for the value-added producers, because we think that's where the job growth is in food system development and the one that we can be the most helpful at. So on campus, we're building right now our own community kitchen, shared use community kitchen. This morning it came up about Detroit Community Kitchens, and this will be the 3rd member of that network, a citywide network to provide affordable and convenient access to entrepreneurs. In its first year of operation, Detroit Community Kitchens have helped 14 businesses get licensed, 13 of which are women head of households, 13 of which are minority women head of households. It's a group that, since we took over management of the market in 2006 from the city, which had previously managed it, the city only allowed the sale of fresh fruits and vegetables, plants, and flowers. We already have 125 people that have signed up wanting to sell food products at the market, but not enough of them have come from the city. So the Detroit Kitchen Connect, one objective is to get a vendor base that reflects more of the metropolitan area. But we work with the people who are coming to our market. We work with people who want to come to our market. We work with people who've grown too big to stay at the market. Loves custard pies, quarter sausage. High school, the kitchen can be used for high school-aged entrepreneurial programs like Next Top Chef, which is a cable-style TV cook-off. That's the Food Lab site at St. Peter, St. Paul on the southwest side. We help companies expand in the market district. We're not just a market, we're also the business area around it with 150 businesses, many of whom are food related, and many of them have expansion needs. So quarter sausage took us 3 years to find them space and equipment to go from 400 pounds of production to about 2,900 pounds of production. And this year, we actually helped them connect with a bank, and they're buying equipment to go from 2,900 pounds to about 5,000 pounds, doubling their production again. They're now in 20 different grocery stores around Southeast Michigan. still at the market on Saturday. So too are the McClure brothers, packing grandpa's recipe on mom and dad's back porch 6 years ago. They're now in a production facility in a former auto manufacturing space not too far from the market. They and their 30 employees pack pickles for distribution in 50 US states and 2 provinces in Canada. Loves custard pies, great stories. We have an accelerator project, so we're building a suite of ready-to-go kitchens for those companies that come out of our accelerator. 15,000 square foot of a larger project around advanced food manufacturing will be advanced plug-and-play spaces so that we don't have to wait 3 years for corridor sausage to go from 400 to 2,900 pounds of sausage. In the market, we support our retailers, and we've had some nice, sexy new retailers open up, but the issue of trying to make sure that this place stays safe as a dirty and loud place for working food businesses is part of the DNA, the placemaking that's so important to us. Now, this is really an important part about entrepreneurial development, and that is creative people is redundant. Many of us in this whole new economy thing tend to think of the Richard Floridization of our population, that there are creative people and non-creative people. And that's complete bullshit. Everybody has a creative part of them. Some may be more known than others. But our job is to work to bring it out of people regardless of where they're at. And it's much harder, I have found in my career, as a college-educated person, leading mostly college-educated people, trying to get that reaction from non-college-educated entrepreneurs. So Mo is my poster child for the work we're trying to do to try to identify people with less education that still have great creative skill sets. The exposure of the market. Mo had a shoe stand in a downtown office building that was the space was being donated because the downtown office owner wanted a shoe stand. Great, but not enough business for Mo to flourish. We found an unheated shed on our market line and made it available to Mo. He now has 2 operations. We were kind of worried about Mo's reliability. 2 weeks after he's there, he disappears for 3 weeks. We don't know what's happened. There are these things called telephone, and we've tried to work with Mo since to use them. But Mo got kidnapped by a little Italian, or we're not sure, the family's from the Alps somewhere, he had a broken accent. But he hadn't seen a cobbler at a markets and somewhere in Bavaria 35 years ago. Turns out he had just retired from his shoe shop in New Jersey. Turns out he was the 2-time Cobbler of the Year award by the National Cobblers Association. And turns out he was past president of the National Cobblers Association. He takes Mo on a 3-week journey up and down the East Coast, having him stop at 10 different shoe repair stores for a day or 2 of training with 10 different shoe operators. That exposure wouldn't have been there at the office building. So putting our entrepreneurs into the marketplace is what we do and what we need to do collectively as the entrepreneurial industrial complex. New immigrants. The incidence of entrepreneurism amongst new immigrants is off the charts compared to those of us who have been here for a while, because if you move 6,000 miles, you might have a little bit more urgency than if you move 6 blocks. Just saying. So, to conclude, there are still those of us, not just the technology folk, but a lot of people, economic developers, elected people, who don't see the ability of small food to be able to compete with big food. They just think we're wasting our time trying to grow food entrepreneurism. And for them, we have a very compelling metaphor. What has happened since 1985 in the world of beer in the United States? Today, so many of our elected leaders think that small ag is the equivalent of going back to medieval times. That's the point of that photo. But today, craft beers are almost 15% of market share by value, about 8% by volume. Today, there are more than 3,000 craft breweries, brew pubs, small regional brewers in existence, compared to 108 in 1985. There are 2,000 more in permitting and planning and processing stages. This is what's already happening in the world of small food production. It isn't based on government programs. The world of craft beer has been driven by people like Frank and I sitting at a bar stool and deciding what we're going to have. And the power of the pocketbook, the power of narrative, has transformed that industry. And to me, there's nothing more comical than hearing Big Beer's kind of rebuts. Peter Coors, look him up online. You almost feel sorry for the guy. He just has no clue what's going on. And my favorite image of this world is that on Super Bowl Tuesday, Bud Light and Miller Lite and Coors Light sales teams all sit down and talk about their great victory, about all the money they spent yesterday. Meanwhile, the sales chart continues to slowly recede. So we need to work the narrative around food, continue this process of getting our people and take advantage of the food opportunities because we all eat. Now, I'll conclude quickly with my leadership formulas that will help you inform your work, not just in food, but across community development work. So knowledge times capacity equals outstanding leadership, or leadership to the third power. Every town has opportunities to succeed, I believe, over time, but only those communities that have outstanding leadership transform that opportunity into success. Now, I would say that information, knowledge is very important, but it's not information. I think we had a conversation out in the hallway today. Gertrude Stein in 1929 said, it's a shame people get so much information all day long they've lost all their native sense. 1929. No wonder the world is so not commonsensical today. So I would argue that knowledge is some combination of intelligence, information, times more than equal share of wisdom, times faith. So without faith, we don't sustain our wisdom and our knowledge and our information long enough for it to make a difference in a tough world. Now, capacity is a much more complicated one, but some of the key variables are R, for responsibility. Who is taking responsibility in your towns? Sweat and passion are needed to amplify that. The biggest one on here, back to entrepreneurism, is G. That's a Harry Truman tip of the hat to G is for gumption. G is for risk-taking. H squared is equally important and that's humor and humility. Because you're going to fail, you're going to fall down, you're going to got to get up, you got to smile, you got to shake it off. Deeds over time, D over T, equals trust, which if we're not building trust in our communities, it ain't going to work long term. You're not going to build the team. That's how you get capacity. So at the end of the day, success is opportunity meeting leadership to the third power. And so the joke is, if you don't have outstanding leadership for your towns, and helps to answer your question, I think, you're shit out of luck. You're simply SOL.